I greet you in the name of Christ. And from our gospel today, we heard this passage. For nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered, and nothing secret that will not become known. In August 2016, actor Will Smith said, "Racism is not getting worse, it's getting filmed." Who could have imagined how true these prophetic words would become? And I really don't know if things are worse or not, but they are getting uncovered. And the truth is almost unbearable to speak. And I speak to you today as a white, educated American male. And I speak to you from a place of power and privilege. For far too long, we have denied our racism. And when I use these first-person plural pronouns, I am not only referring to the United States in which I live, or global racism. When I say I or we, I mean the church and its leaders. Of course, I am neither the first one to do so, nor am I naming anything new. But Jesus in Matthew knows that human nature is wont to remain comfortable in our denial, so as to avoid exposure, and that we are also quite adept at dodging disclosure, making up excuses for sidestepping the truth. What is getting exposed, of course, is not just racism, but our complicity with it. And that's what is so painful and threatening for many of us. Not just how deeply systemic racism is, but how the church as an institution expertly harbors racism. Not just how the church has relied on white privilege, but how it has kept silent in the preaching of the truth of the gospel. For nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered, and nothing secret that will not become known. To change hearts, the good news of Jesus Christ must be bad news for those who have power and privilege in our society. Before the gospel was good news for the poor in spirit, good news for the marginalized, good news for those who are overlooked, beaten down, good news for the vulnerable and the discriminated, good news for those who mourn, for the meek, for those persecuted for standing up for righteousness and justice. It was and is very bad news for those whose power banks on chokeholds, whose power takes advantage of anyone it can, for those whose power makes money on the backs of others who are treated as less than, whose power is hell-bent on keeping the power in any way it can, and it will threaten with force and charge with death to do so. Scholar Ibram X. Kendi argues that the heartbeat of racism is denial, and the heartbeat of anti-racism is confession. The heartbeat of racism is denial, and the heartbeat of anti-racism is confession. This is why we begin every liturgical celebration at St. Andrew's outside the Easter season with the confession of sin and a prayer for God's mercy and forgiveness. But it's got to be more than that. Being an anti-racist, says Kendi, requires persistent self-awareness, constant self-criticism, and regular self-examination. Just a few days ago, the staff at St. Andrew's was in a meeting, and we were talking about how the landing page on our website could be created in such a way that visually anybody who clicked there would know immediately that we are supportive of an anti-racist agenda and that we want social change and that we are supportive of the Black Lives Matter movement. And as we were talking about this, finally someone said, here we are, a bunch of white people talking about the way our website might be perceived by people of color. This is exactly the kind of self-examination and self-awareness and constant self-criticism that we need to do courageously in order to recover from our complicity in systemic racism. So will the church and its subsidiaries be willing to engage in this kind of self-exposure? I'm afraid that the gospel has been hoarded, personalized, monetized, institutionalized, theologized, and denominationalized, when in fact, it absolutely denunciates despotism. If the church cannot be the model for confession and conversion of life, then we have no right to claim that we are living out the Great Commission that Jesus left for us. The time is now, my fellow white people in our white church, to hear Jesus's words and do them. What I say to you in the dark, tell in the light. And what you hear whispered, proclaim from the housetops. No wonder that 3 times in this gospel passage, we hear Jesus's injunction, do not be afraid. There is a lot of which to be afraid of these days, but it is not just the spread of COVID-19. It's the insidious inability of those who profess faith in Jesus Christ to tell truth to powers that know not love. This is hard and it's risky work, but it is the work that God is calling us to do. So do not be afraid. Speak the truth. Live the gospel.